Welcome to the EarthWorks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon with many of the turf friends we've met over the past 35 years.
Hi, everybody. This is Joel Simmons, and I'm happy to say we have our dear friend Lawrence Mayhew back again. And again, he is one of the most asked for guests, and we lean on him for a lot of things. We lean on him for our chemical expertise, and we actually call him the EarthWorks chemist. I don't know if that's a title you like or not, but I don't care. I like it. And we lean on you. But, it's funny, and I've said this many times when we've had you on, but when we get together with you as a team, we have to record it because we can only get so much into our little heads. Today, I want to bring you on, and I want to really dive deep into one of my favorite one of my favorite subjects. I just blew it. One of my favorite subjects, calcium. And recently, I've been called a heretic and what else was I called? A whole bunch of things. Not a heretic, a charlatan. I was called a charlatan recently by my dear friend, the dinosaur, who loves to bully people and is really, speaking of being bad for the industry, extremely bad for the industry. But one of the things that I will say definitively is I don't sell calcium, with the exception of Calvantage, and I think we should talk about Calvantage, a liquid form. But I want to really dive into what calcium does for the plant and what it does for the physics of the soil, what it does for microbial populations. And let's start because we got a little tangled up with my friend about this whole battle of how ammonium sulfate reacts in the soil, in particularly in its relationship to calcium. And I asked you to do a whole bunch of stuff, and you came back with this laundry list of research data and references talking about the study of how ammonium sulfate, and it's been pretty well documented. I mean, I can't think far enough back to a time when I didn't believe strongly and obviously see it that ammonium sulfate can release calcium in the soil. Help us better understand from a scientific standpoint. Give us some of the research that you know of out there that addresses that specific topic, and that can get us down this road of the values of calcium.
As you may know, I come from the regenerative agricultural world, where there's a long history of what works and what doesn't work when you're trying to reduce inputs, trying to rely on nature providing nutrition to plants. And ammonium sulfate came right to the forefront 30 years ago, easily 30 years. That might be a conservative estimate.
Yeah.
I read an issue of a book written by Steinbach from the University of Wisconsin in 1908, talking about the benefits of ammonium sulfate. And he said in there, it acidifies the soil and it increases biological activity. Now, that was 1908, a professor of science talking about how it increased biological activity. So ammonium sulfate has a really, really long history as being effective. A lot of the regenerative the organic growers cannot use ammonium sulfate because it's only available in a synthetic form.
Right.
And that really holds them back, actually. Yeah, because these farmers have usually gone through a long education of what works and what doesn't work before they became organic. And ammonium sulfate was always on their list, always.
And
Why?
there is no ammonium sulfate that's a natural occurring. I mean, some of these
Well, there might be.
compounds
I
are.
can't say no. A lot of things occur naturally, but there's always the commercial problems of mining it and getting it out of the deposits. That could be the case here. I didn't look that part up. But you asked me to comment on the chemistry. The chemistry of ammonium sulfate added to a soil system is kind of straightforward, really. And what happens is that it acidifies through something called nitrification-induced acidification. Got that?
I'm writing it down as you say.
Okay. Uh, Initially, when in the presence of water, the ammonium and the sulfates will break apart, dissociate. The ammonium is now free to kind of float around and do what it wants to do. And the sulfate's free to kind of float around the soil system also. So one of the first things that happens is cation exchange reactions. Ammonium, NH4 with a positive charge, will be attracted to negatively charged soil colloids, CEC in other words, or cation exchange reactions.
And various cations in the soil.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they will move on to a soil colloid, and that will displace something. And a lot of times, the thing that's actually displaced is calcium. It's sitting on the colloid, it's there, positively charged. The reason for this is rather involved, but very simply, the ammonium cation has the ability to displace a double charged calcium based mostly upon what's called the hydrated radius. The hydrated ammonium ions are small, 0.33 nanometers, compared to a hydrated calcium ion, which is zero point 0.4. So it's smaller. It can get into these colloids quicker, better, faster. The other thing that happens is what I mentioned earlier is the nitrification. The ammonium in combination with oxygen will generate 2 molar concentrations of H plus, which is the acid moiety in water, for every mole of ammonium. So it generates a lot of acid
Right.
simply by reacting with oxygen and water.
And that's the acidification.
That's the acidification step right there. Now, the intermediate reaction at that point is a nitrate. The nitrate combines with oxygen, and then we have nitrates. So we end up with nitrates floating around in this soil system. They combine readily with, guess what? Calcium, right? That's
Calcium
a
nitrate.
that's a really fast typical reaction.
Yeah.
So when that happens, we have a very leachable form of calcium at that point, calcium nitrate, and it's very difficult to stay in solution, and it stabilizes the soil system by leaching out. So now we have a leachable form. We can prevent that, but if you don't take steps to prevent that, it'll eventually leach out and deplete the soil of calcium. So now that becomes a negative thing.
Yeah.
Releasing calcium in a more bioavailable form is a good thing, but the continuous use, continually repeated use of ammonium sulfate will result in calcium leaching out of the soil.
Which means we just simply have to continue to monitor and manage the calcium load within that soil colloid.
Yeah, you need to do some calcium
Yeah.
management. There's also one more effect that occurs chemically under these conditions. Under acid conditions caused by the ammonium sulfate, we have now Al aluminum 3 plus cations floating around, and they displace calcium on the soil colloid also. So we have a secondary effect. And the problem with building up aluminum is that it can become toxic. It reduces the growth of roots, which we don't want to do in any regenerative or sustainable system. We want to increase root mass, and this has the opposite effect because aluminum ions interfere with calcium absorption right at the rhizosphere.
But
So you got a lot of things going on.
aluminum toxicity is only occurring at a very low pH, though, right?
It will induce it, yes.
Yeah. Oh, it will. Okay. So if the soil pH drops heavily, aluminum can be released. Let me ask you this. So
Mhm,
we're using ammonium sulfate, calcium gets knocked off.
mhm.
What happens to it? Where does it go? Does it become available? Can it become available? And is there documentation of that and research on that?
Yeah, that was, you said I sent you a lot of references.
Yes,
Well,
you did your homework. I'm very,
that
very impressed and proud of you.
it wasn't
You
that
always do your
hard.
homework. No, I know. That's the funny part. Yeah, you're right. It wasn't that hard. It was right there in the, and it's like I said earlier. I mean, this whole that fact that there is a conversation and there really isn't with one silly exception. But it's been known for a very long time. We've all known it that we use ammonium sulfate and we have to manage and kind of
Mhm,
make sure calcium is stable in the soil profile. But so you're releasing it, you're knocking
mhm.
it off with ammonium sulfate. It goes into solution, at
Oh
least a
yeah,
little bit
yeah,
of
it
it. So it
goes.
becomes
Yeah, yeah, it's highly soluble. Well, calcium sulfate is more soluble than some forms of calcium, but when it becomes calcium nitrate, that's extremely extremely soluble by
Yeah.
comparison and very leachable. And it's now an ionic solution, means there's a positively charged calcium that's easily dissociated with that nitrate, that highly negatively charged anion. So therefore, it goes into water solution quite easily, which is, you would think, a good thing. You
You
know,
would think.
the emphasis in agriculture and agronomy for years has been high solubility, high solubility. Well, that's not the end of it. The problem is that calcium is now pretty much free to do other things, and what it usually does is it precipitates out of that soil system somehow instead of becoming part of the soil system
Yeah.
if we don't address the organic matter content in that soil or in a product or something like that. You need
Yeah.
to address the carbon in order to stabilize the calcium that's now become more bioavailable.
Because if you're knocking it off, the carbon or the humus input will kind of manage it and hold it.
Mhm.
Is that fair?
The
Yeah.
plants will react by releasing a lot of carbon-based materials like organic acids, amino acids, sugars, phenolic compounds, proteins, enzymes, secondary metabolites. All of these have the capability of complexing with that free calcium that's out there. And what I mean by complex, it's like they're roaming around free. They need to be stabilized by something. And amino acids like glutamic acid, aspartic acid, and other things that have what they call carboxyl groups on them
Hmm.
will actually, uh, we could use the word chelate, that's pretty safe, but safer word is complex. They will complex with these materials. This is a natural reaction. You know, nature figured this out a long time ago to stabilize things such as calcium cations that are floating around there and they don't know what they want to do exactly. And then
Just hanging
these
out.
things, these root exudates produce these materials that will capture them and stabilize them, keep them from falling out of the soil solution.
And the plant is doing, I mean, the plant is sending out these root exudates purposely with the
Yes,
intent to capture this calcium or these free
yes.
ions that are running around. Now, the calcium that's going into the plant, it's not in ionic form, is it? Or is it? Is it being taken up as an ionic form, just a calcium molecule, or is it being taken up in a calcium sulfate and or a calcium nitrate form?
Yeah, typically calcium crosses the membranes as a cation. Then it goes into the plant where it becomes compartmentalized, which is kind of unusual for most elements like that. It'll be combined with oxalic acid, for example, in the plant. Then it becomes calcium oxalate, for example, which is a relatively complex carbon molecule again,
Yeah.
and stabilizing it. Carbon comes up all the time because it stabilizes these materials. So the plant root senses that there's calcium in a bioavailable form out there, and it triggers the exudates to make sure all these reactions will go in the direction the plant desires.
So you're really talking about this incredible symbiotic relationship between plant and soil. I mean, where are the microbes in this little reaction? I mean, they're part of this, aren't they?
When it comes to calcium, it's a non-redox element. The chemistry seems to be a little more straightforward. When we get into redox elements, then the biology plays an extremely important part. In this case, the biology is there to release the cations and to capture them with some sort of complexing agents. That can be done by microbes. Microbes don't have a reliance on calcium as plants do. So, but the microbes do assist in this to some degree, but really it's more the plants doing than it is the
So the
microbes
plant's
doing
actually
something.
saying, I need some calcium, help me go get this.
Hmm.
And if you think about it, I mean, calcium is the backbone, no pun intended, of the plant. I mean, I always say in my classes that if we're sitting in this room and this is a cell, these walls are made of calcium pectate, and the stronger, the walls, the stronger the level of calcium there. So plants actually trying to produce some structural benefit, right, among other things, right?
Yeah, you mentioned the pectates. The pectolytic enzymes that attack plants are shut down by bioavailable calcium.
Interesting.
Comes in pretty handy.
Yeah. Let me go back a step. You keep using
Okay.
this phrase redox. I want to make sure people understand what that means. There's actually a pretty good product out there called redox, and I don't want people to confuse what you're talking about chemically
Oh,
with the
sorry.
redox reaction. But no, that's good. I think we've done this once before, but I think it's important to qualify that terminology. Explain to us what the redox reaction is chemically.
Well, it stands for reduction oxidation. If something gets oxidized chemically, then something else needs to get reduced in order to balance out that reaction. Or if something gets reduced, something else
Has to be
nearby,
oxidized.
and part of the reaction will be oxidized.
Yeah.
Thus, the colloquial term that existed in chemistry now for a couple hundred years is just redox reactions. Most elements have the ability to go through redox reactions. In other words, they would change their oxidative state. But calcium, magnesium, zinc, mercury, cadmium, there's a few of them out there that do not go through redox reactions.
Chemically, really.
Correct. They're all like calcium is has a positive two charge on it. That's it.
Yeah.
There's no that doesn't go through reduction or oxidation. So that
And
charge
and
never
what does?
changes.
Give me an example of one that does.
Iron,
There you go.
iron, big
Because
time.
of its because of what?
Well, iron 3 with a 3 positive charge on it is generally perceived as being non-bioavailable. It's usually bound to a mineral when it's in that that state of oxidation plus 3.
Right.
If if some exudates released by plants or microbes come along and they're reducing agents, they try to reduce it. They reduce it down to Fe2, 2 plus, which is now bioavailable. It's an excellent example of a redox
Okay.
reaction, reduction oxidation. And then manganese is just crazy. It's really hard to nail down what manganese, what its redox state is going to be at any given condition. It's so all over the board. I've seen graphs of it where there's just a mass of dots on the graph, and you can it just kind of does what it wants to do. It's very, very unusual material. It also goes through some things called dismutation, where it takes its own electrons and oxidizes itself. It's really a weird one that doesn't kind of fit the textbook. To
It's we were just
iron
talking.
does.
Yeah, we were just talking about manganese because there is thinking that the ammonium sulfate can release manganese, but you're not completely convinced of that. And I don't know
Mm.
where the research is on that. Uh,
It could. It's possible, but it's really, really hard to predict.
Yeah, I've had a couple agronomists who I have great respect for have told me that manganese can be released alongside with calcium when ammonium sulfate is applied.
I would agree with that. We just don't know. It's really hard to quantify. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's I think that's
It's
the point.
got
You know,
low predictive value there. What's
yeah.
going to happen?
I don't want to inundate everybody with a calcium lecture, so let's go back. Again, the use, I mean, and we use ammonium sulfate. I mean, we have ammonium sulfate in a number of products. One of our biggest products is 822, the Replenish 822, which is compost with ammonium sulfate in it, and it's very effective. But we monitor soils on a fairly regular basis. So in continuous use of a product like that or any ammonium sulfate product, and I'm a big believer of ammonium sulfate, as long as we can monitor that soil profile, that cation balance, can we keep the calcium? I mean, is it manageable to be able to say, you know, we'll be able to, if we lose some of it, we can manage it back with either limestone or gypsum, or what's the best strategy there? I mean, how do you handle that?
Well, the best strategy is don't overdo it.
Well, thank you, Terry. Thank you so much.
I would say sell less, Joel.
So that's fine with me. That's been our motto
No, your product that you're mentioning is more stabilized by
by
compost.
the
Is that correct?
compost, by the
Yeah.
organic matter. Yeah,
Yeah. So you have a biological factor there
right.
and a carbon factor
Yeah,
there.
and it's
So
homogeneous, so it's easy to get
so
to
that brings
it
in a high
stays.
degree.
Yeah,
That brings in a high degree of stability, a lot less likely it's going to leach.
right.
And you probably have a very low NPK value on the tag. If
It's an 8%, but that's, so it's about I should know this, 1,400 pounds of compost per ton and
hmm,
600 pounds per ton of ammonium sulfate.
okay.
But again, it's homogenized. So yeah, the ammonium sulfate is really kind of now
Hmm,
homogenized into this compost slurry and then, prilled and
hmm,
made spreadable. But and we've looked at this over the years and we feel pretty strongly that it is much more stable than just using a straight synthetic. And obviously, bringing the carbon to the table, it allows it to get through nitrification a little bit more effectively, which is good too.
hmm.
But it is it is going to release calcium, and we've seen that over the years by monitoring soil tests, the continuous use. And for the most part, this product is not used on sand. It's really designed for soils and fairways and sports fields. But we certainly have had it on, sand. Sand soccer fields are a great example. And share with us your thoughts on using ammonium sulfate on a sand versus using it on a soil. Obviously, the potential to knock off the calcium, what is there of calcium on sand, is going to be more stronger.
Yeah. On sandy soils, there's very little clay for that calcium to
Yeah.
bind with and stabilize. And that's a big factor right there. So it's more likely to leach. There's very little organic matter, so the complexation reactions that I've been talking about probably won't happen to any large degree unless the organic matter content is over two, but most golf course tees are
And
anything,
greens, yeah.
yeah, greens, they're not going to be greater than two.
Yeah,
Uh,
most of them are not. Especially
in
especially younger sand built greens and teas,
mhm.
the organic
In
matter.
regenerative agriculture, the magic number seems to be 4% organic
Right.
matter, which you're not going to do in
Yeah.
turf. I totally understand that. But
Well, if
that's
we
a
do, it's going to be thatch, and that's not what we want. So yeah.
okay. That's kind of a, I don't want to use the word magical, but it's kind of a turning point number. It's 4%, 5%. We get excellent crop production. We get very high disease resistance, get very good nutrient utilization. We get all the benefits of carbon at that point. But let's say 2% and less, which is what you're dealing with. From a product developer standpoint, I make sure that every product I've ever developed for those, like especially on sand, is going to have a high humic content in it. It's going to be humic acids or fulvic acids, and sometimes in some products, both.
Yeah.
Both are in there.
And I apologize. I didn't introduce you as the a world-renowned humic substance specialist like I usually do. But yeah, this is a good subject because that humic substance in the soil profile is going to have a reservoir, if you will, or holding capacity for lots of things, but calcium certainly being one of them, right?
Yeah, and if you are practicing biological
Soil management.
soil management, uh, you are getting a lot of benefits from these plant exudates because they release very complex materials that allow for more efficient breakdown of thatch, for example. That's
Yeah,
pretty, you can observe that
yeah, yeah.
happening. And in addition to everything else we talked about. And if you look at the soil profile under that kind of management system, you see more of a dispersal of the dark matter, the humified matter, the matter that's gone through all of these cycles of breakdown and recombination and then recombining back into humified materials, the dark materials.
Right.
These are natural materials, and you don't have to have a lot of it in order to be effective. I ran across some math on it today. It was mind-boggling. One little bit of humic acid can control a lot of material. So you
This is
don't
something
need
you
this.
read recently?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how
Intriguing.
much research on this subject matter is occurring across the world. I mean, I've run into it a lot. I'm sure you do more than I do, being that you're focused on it. But there's constantly new research being developed on humic substances and the relationship of plant microbe soil activity, right? I mean, are we seeing this fairly regularly now?
Yeah. The Humic Products Trade Association just had their annual meeting about 2 weeks ago, and the research that's presented is
Yeah.
just astonishing. What really stuck in my visually, what really stuck for me during one of the presentations was this idea that fulvic acids are low molecular weight materials and they get pulled into plants. And I've always said, that should be easy to prove. How come I've never seen any proof?
Yeah.
But yet people still say that. Or humic acids are so complex they cannot be pulled into plants. Well, this one scientist presented something I can't even remember what it was. It's something about the Toledo method. They took NMR and UV and they took all these different analytical techniques and they blended into one program to demonstrate what this, can't call it a molecule, what this material may look like. And he had the humic acids on the top half of the slide and he had the fulvic acids on the bottom half of the slide. Hardly any difference whatsoever. These both are extremely, extremely high molecular weight, extremely complex materials.
Yeah. Very
I'm like,
dynamic. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I've been waiting for that.
Explain the difference between humic and fulvic. You and I have gone back and forth. We've talked about
Mhm.
it here on the podcast. I think at some point you've even said to us that humics or fulvics may not even really exist. Where are we with the idea of fulvic acids and then the comparison between humic and fulvic?
Well, the problem with both of those terms is that they're operationally defined.
Yes.
It's like saying sea salt is the sodium chloride left behind after you evaporate the water in
Yeah.
seawater. That tells you nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
You only know how they came up with that definition for sea salt. That's called an operational definition. Humic acids are defined basically on their solubility or their insolubility. Let's put it that way. Their lack of solubility at relatively high pH. If the beginning material was a humified substance and you extracted it with an alkaline, you cannot get it to go into acid solution. It just won't happen. Fulvic acids have been classically defined as the humified material that's soluble in both alkali, high pH, and acid,
That's
low
acids, yeah.
pH. Horrible, horrible definition.
Yeah, that's I'm not sure it makes any sense or if anybody that's listening is going to make any sense out of it, but
Well, that same definition applies to salt water, by the way. So
yeah, exactly.
it's
Operational. Yeah,
operational.
you've talked to us a
Horrible.
lot about that here on the podcast and certainly
Mhm.
in our on our groups. But talk to me. I mean, let's stay with this calcium theme.
Yes,
Talk
right.
to me if you're comfortable doing this about what calcium is doing physically in a soil environment. Obviously, sand, it's not going to have that same reaction, but with certainly within a higher CEC or a soil that has clay, what's the function? What is calcium going to do for us physically?
The the big story around calcium should be how it increases the bioavailability of other nutrients.
Yeah.
And then when the plant can take up other nutrients in a more balanced form rather than a restricted form, you get a healthier plant. You get a plant that can actually function more efficiently. Plants then have natural disease protection along with proper growth, resistance to stress, all the
Mhm.
things that a human being would go through if they ate a balanced diet. So physically, that's what happens to the plants. I think what you're saying physically, what happens to the soils? The biggest thing that happens in the presence of a bioavailable form of calcium in a soil system is the soil structure it improves the soil structure.
How does it do that?
How does it do that? Well, a lot of people say you add calcium so you get better flocculation of the soil. Well, that's not exactly what's going on. What's going on is the story we already told. In the presence of a highly bioavailable form of calcium, it triggers plant exudates to
Right.
do this, do that, release a myriad of things. That feeds the soil system. That increases the carbon content in the soil system just by magnitudes,
Yeah.
something we can't do by putting in more carbon. The plant does it for us. then you see better soil structure at that point. But it's not a direct effect of calcium, it's an indirect effect.
Right.
Calcium's often sold on improving soil structure.
Yeah,
But what it
gypsum has
does
been
is,
sold as a little you see pictures of gypsum bags with little shovels on it,
uh
and they say it's going to release, tied up stuff, but it's really a bigger story than that. It's
big
really
story.
the plant,
Yeah.
so we add calcium and the plant immediately starts spewing out plant exudates for purposes of being able to react with it and draw it in.
For the purpose of increasing the bioavailability of everything around it.
Everything is going to increase. So
Yeah.
all things are going to increase. So let's talk about how we do that practically. I mean, is this by adding limestone? Is it by adding gypsum? I
Nope.
mean,
Nope.
what's the best way to start this reaction?
Limestone can be used to adjust pH. And it's a misconception to say that it's the calcium that's causing the shift in pH. That is so off the mark because because the hydrogen, the highly positively charged hydrogen, what do you want to call it, atom or whatever,
Cation.
cation will react with the negative cation called carbonate, not
Okay.
calcium.
What do we
It's
end up
already
with?
it's already positively charged. Why would it mess with the calcium, right?
Right. Why? I don't need you. Get out of here.
It's out there looking for something of an opposite charge.
Yeah.
That's the carbonate. That combination produces water and CO2.
Okay.
And that combination is highly buffering, and that's where you see the shift in pH. However, the calcium has been sort of left alone in that reaction. It's kicked out there. Now it needs to be combined with something, and it's free to roam. So that's a little different than than the way nature would like to see it happen. So it's highly unstable at that point. So it probably becomes calcium, whatever's available, the nitrates, the
Whatever it can
chlorides,
react to.
more
Yeah.
carbonates. Yeah. So that makes that an extremely slow reaction as a result. The thermodynamics just aren't there to push it very fast. It's driven by how much hydrogen plus ion there is.
And we're talking about limestone specifically.
Mhm.
Talk about the differences between what we call high calcium lime or calcitic lime and dolomitic lime, and
Well,
how,
high calcitic lime, there's a deposit over here in Iowa near me,
yeah.
just doesn't have very much magnesium in it at all. I think it's less than 1%.
No, that's
The
very low.
problem with, pardon?
That's very low. I mean, a lot of times it's less, it's around 5%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And dolomitic has a definition. It's something like 8, if I recall.
8% magnesium.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've looked that up. Don't hold me to it. But
Now, I've seen them as high as 20%.
yeah, when they get around 11, they're typically called dolomitic limestones.
Yeah, yeah,
That's what we have right where I'm standing here in Wisconsin. I'm standing on a base of dolomitic limestone. So the worst thing you can do if you want to grow a garden or anything around here is bring in more
put,
dolomitic limestone.
put more magnesium on top of all the
But
magnesium.
over there in Iowa, they don't have as much magnesium, so it's a nice trade, right? You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
they can have our dolomitic. We
And
can.
can in a high mag environment, can a calcitic lime kind of react some of the magnesium out?
What it does is if the pH is really low and you're going to get a reaction with the calcium carbonate in that calcitic limestone, then you get a reaction. But what we're trying to avoid is build up magnesium in
Right.
soils in Wisconsin that are already high in magnesium. So it's balancing. We're just balancing.
Yeah, we
Uh,
don't ever recommend a dolomite on a high mag soil.
well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying that as the generic we, but yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. But if you do have a magnesium deficiency, will dolomite bring some magnesium to the table that the plant can start to draw in?
A little bit. You see, that again depends upon the pH of the soil. If it's in a low pH, yeah, you will get a reaction with the carbonates, not with the magnesium, not with the calcium.
Right.
And the carbonates will actually buffer that to the point where some magnesium will be released. From a product standpoint, that would not be very effective.
Right. It's not the best way to do it. Let's
Mhm.
talk about gypsum, the comparison of gypsum to limestone.
Mhm.
There's basically two types of common gypsum, anhydrite and then dihydrate.
Mhm.
I got that right. I think I have that right.
You're right.
All right. So talk about gypsum. I mean, the big thing is that it's sold as a very reactive product. And if you go to the Home Depot, you'll see gypsum bags that have little shovels on them because they're implying that it's gonna, loosen up this tight soils and do all those things. What do we know about gypsum?
Gypsum fits a more complex program than just relying on gypsum.
Right.
If you want to bring in a relatively soluble form of calcium, which is not pH dependent. So again, calcium's a non-redox.
And
Um,
gypsum is calcium sulfate, just so we're
oh
clear.
yeah, I should explain
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, calcium sulfate is anhydrite.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
And
Go
and
ahead.
calcium sulfate in the hydrated form, little dot H2O, 2H2O after its formula, that is the dihydrate. That's the common form of gypsum.
And
That's what
that's the
people,
form that we really want to look for when we're buying gypsum, right? The dihydrate,
yeah, it's
not
very
necessarily the
common.
anhydrite.
The anhydrates are very rare.
Yeah.
They have to be buried and they cannot be exposed to water or oxygen for a long time.
Yeah.
And that to maintain the anhydrite character, but it will convert
There
to
are
the hydrated
anhydrite
form.
deposits, especially out west. And I've seen through distribution, anhydrite available, and I've always been confused by that because I was always under the impression that it's the dihydrate form that we're really wanting to use and is
Yes.
the most
Yeah.
reactive and the most effective.
Yeah,
All right, good. So let's
the
call it.
anhydrite needs to take on water, and it's
Yeah,
going to do
yeah.
that first before it does anything.
So you got calcium sulfate essentially.
Hmm.
It hits the soil. It breaks
Hmm.
apart. Is it bringing sulfur to the table? Is it making
Yeah,
sulfur available to
certainly
the
is.
plant?
Hmm.
And
Yes,
and and
yes.
and not super fast, but faster
No.
than limestone. It will provide some available calcium and get some of that stuff going.
Hmm. From a
So
product development standpoint, we usually use about three different forms of calcium, so we cover all the
yeah.
bases.
So within the replenished line that EarthWorks produces, one of the things that we talk a lot about is, we're feeding chickens a lot of calcium, different forms of calcium, because obviously we're trying to build cell strength of the egg. We want that egg to be as strong as it can. So the diet for a chicken is typically high in calcium, mineral dense, high calcium. But our understanding is that most of that just goes right out the back end. But it's been digested by the bird, then it's
Hmm.
been composted. Does that take that mineral form of calcium? And it's usually I think it's actually in a limestone form that they're feeding these birds. Once it goes through that biological digestion in the bird, in the gut of the bird, and then in a
Hmm.
compost pile, what's the chemical reaction now with that calcium that's there? Is it more bioavailable? Is it about
Yeah,
the
it
same?
is. Yeah, there's a simple test you can run at most labs where you can ask the lab to run what they call the available calcium.
Hmm.
If you run that form of calcium through that standardized analysis, you get a pretty decent number compared to the limestone, calcium carbonate that went into the critter. So there's obviously some kind of chemical reaction going there.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the physiology of a chicken.
You're
You know,
not?
I don't know if that's an acid reaction or not. Probably is.
I think
Uh,
it is.
it does get ground up, right?
Yeah.
It's part of the digestive
Yeah.
process. So obviously they're mixing it with some kind of enzymes, and out comes a different form of calcium than what went in.
And we've seen that, and we've seen the test of that, and it's always something we've talked about. But again, I've always talked about building a pyramid base for calcium, something with a very sustainable form, and that obviously we talk about limestone, something a little bit more available like gypsum, something again as you move up the point toward the point of the pyramid, a little bit more available, and that's the replenished forms of calcium. All of these products are so. I think we've seen testing on some of our products as high as 12, 14%. We don't talk a lot about that because, we don't want people thinking it's going to completely change pH because it's so available, it's not going to change pH. But then we start looking at the pinnacle of the pyramid, and you and I have worked
Wait a
together.
minute, wait a minute. I just missed something. Are you saying that people think that the calcium content in a product will change pH?
I think there's some truth to that, to people thinking that. Yeah, there's,
Huh, really?
we've had a lot of pushback on that over the years when people think that they see 10%, 12% calcium. I think on our bags we have to list the minimum, so it's usually around 8%, 6%. But
Mhm.
we've often been questioned that, and I think you've rest our mind assured that that's not going to happen certainly not in a super fast way. Is that where your
Hmm.
head's going right now?
Well, I thought that went away 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, we thought a lot of things went away 20 years ago, but he's back on the airways now saying everybody's
Okay,
a
not the
charlatan.
calcium. Yeah,
Uh, but
good God.
that calcium, that available calcium from the composted material, is actually fairly available. And then,
Hey, wait a minute. They understand that calcium sulfate will not change the pH,
many people do. I think there's still
but they
some,
do understand that calcium carbonate will change the pH.
many people do, and I think we're
What's the
hoping.
difference between those two?
Well, the chemistry is a little different, isn't it?
Isn't it obvious? One's a salt,
One's a
one's a
sulfur,
sulfate, one's a carbonate. The
right?
carbonate moves, there's calcium in both of those.
There is.
So how do you explain calcium sulfate does not move pH, whereas calcium carbonate will
That's
move
why
pH?
you're here today.
Okay.
So,
I'm amazed. I'm
have we
absolutely
explained
amazed.
it? Have we done that well? I don't know. I
I
think
don't
we
know.
have.
I'm always amazed at that.
Let me be self-serving here for a second, and I'm sorry. Maybe I am a charlatan, and maybe I am a calcium seller. The only thing I do sell that is calcium is the product that you and I have worked very hard together on,
Hmm.
CalVantage. And what we're
Hmm.
doing there is trying to create more availability by bringing in multiple forms of calcium and by having some of these carbon related materials. How does a product like that improve the availability of the calcium? What's the chemistry behind, the difference between this base of the pyramid? Now we're at the pinnacle of the pyramid with a liquid foliar. And can calcium even be foliar? That's a different question. But explain how a good balanced calcium product becomes more available than a gypsum or even a digested calcium in a compost like Replenish.
It's really hard to say what's going to happen to anything once it hits the soil. So it's always
That's true.
been, yeah, it's always been my perspective that if you want to cover all the bases, then you get more than one ingredient in there that's supplying the primary nutrient.
Yeah.
So in this case, calcium. How much can I say about your calcium product?
As well, you're the formulator, so say what
Yeah, well,
you
I
know.
know
I
what's
mean,
in it.
well, don't give away company secrets, but we can talk in general terms about,
You tell your audience what's in it as for calcium, and then I'll explain the
let's
biochemistry
just
behind
leave
it.
it at there's a couple forms of calcium, and you can talk about it from there. How's that? I
Okay,
know what we put on there now.
the main thing that separates that product from most any other product out there is that almost all of the calcium, one way or another, is going to be carbon based as far as what it's hooked up to. And we have a manufacturing process. The label says calcium nitrate on the label, but what we do is we do a lot more than just throw that in and call it done.
Right.
We're making sure that, well, first of all, you fully realize that that calcium will easily dissociate from that nitrate. So by blending techniques and adding carbon materials in there and other carbon-based calcium forms, we end up with a very complex, nonlinear type of product, which brings a variety of calcium to the soil, and it's a shotgun technique. Once it hits the soil, something's bound to stick, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, something will work in these products.
And,
It's
and we've seen that with testing protocols, and we've seen calcium coming up within the plant and in the soil. But I think that was a great dissertation on how we go about doing it. And the real magic is that we're binding these elements, and this is true of all the Vantage materials, but CalVantage certainly, we're binding it with carbon. And that's creating that bioavailability. And it's low rates, it's low doses. I mean, we talk ounces per thousand versus pound per thousand, but it's going to be fairly effective at getting it into the plant when it needs it the most. And particularly on light sandy soils that doesn't have good calcium or very low weak calcium soils. So
Mhm.
these are, this is a way to keep the plant strong. And again, if you're talking about a cell, the walls are made of calcium for the most part. So
Mhm.
it goes back to my original question, how important is calcium in the big scheme of plant health?
Improving nutrient availability. Okay, Gary Zimmer in the regenerative world calls calcium the trucker of all
Right.
minerals.
I knew
I
you'd get to the
mean,
trucker.
his point is that if you have a bioavailable form of calcium in a product and you apply it to a soil, that product will increase the nutrient uptake of all nutrients across the board. That is a primary role of calcium. So calcium can do that through various mechanisms. And another thing he says is that boron, if calcium is the trucker, boron is the steering wheel. Okay, every calcium product I've ever worked on also includes boron because those
Right.
two together in biological systems complement each other.
Yeah.
What
Jerry
a lot of
Jerry
people
Bernetti
don't,
called boron the gatekeeper.
yeah, that's great.
I,
That's
you know,
excellent.
yeah, and I've
Mhm.
I've used I've stolen that from him over the years, but
So doesn't that kind of raise the question, if you can find one trace element that supports the
right.
effectiveness of calcium, there must be others, right?
Yeah,
So we
think.
design these products to bring in trace elements that'll support calcium. It might not support the growth of that plant. These trace elements might not do anything. They won't green up, but what they do is they maintain the structural integrity of the calcium so it will get in the plant and be utilized in the plant. So it could come down to just how do these trace elements support the effectiveness of, let's say, calcium.
Yeah.
That's why they're in there.
And that too has been fairly highly researched, hasn't it?
Extremely,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I mean again,
Well, no, I can't say extremely. I kind of felt like I was in this world all by myself for the last 10 years on how trace elements support
I was
and
referring to the calcium piece
enzymatic
of it, but the
activity.
trace elements, yeah. I think you're seeing more and more and more research on the trace elements, though. I mean, look what we're
Mhm.
seeing even within AFCO on silicone. We're getting, I mean, it's if it's not there yet, it's close to being, presented as a essential element. And I
I
think I
I
think
just
in my
ordered.
life, maybe not in my lifetime or yours, but it's certainly a lot of our listeners' lifetime, we're going to see more and more trace elements getting approved, accepted,
Mhm.
more researched, and they're going to discover what these, things do. But like you said, it could be nothing but a gatekeeper. And if that's all it is, I mean, it's still incredibly essential, right? I mean, if we don't have
Mhm.
boron there, are we going to get calcium effectively moving into the plant?
I've studied these trace elements and what they do, and sometimes they're supporting a whole system of things in the background.
Yeah.
So all this goes forward. And I just ordered a book today on scandium.
I don't even know what scandium is. That's
The
great.
the the,
It sounds like a scam, but
the
what explain
biochemistry of
scandium?
scandium.
There's a whole book.
Scandium,
Wait. There's a whole book on scandium.
yeah, the biochemistry of scandium. I just ordered it
Wow,
today. I am
you must
looking
be a
forward
lot
to
of fun
that.
to sit around and have a beer with. That's
Because I know not, I've been able to find zip on how scandium supports biological systems. So maybe there'll be something in there. But scandium and yttrium and all of the rare earth elements
yeah,
have the same chemistry.
yeah. So
And
what
their
what are you expecting
chemistry,
to see from
ironically enough,
scandium?
is around the bioavailability of calcium.
Oh wow, really? And that's what they're basically saying, and that's what this book you expect this book to say is that the relationship. It's again,
Well, scandium and yttrium and all the rare earth elements have almost identical chemistry.
wow.
And their chemistry allows them to support calcium in living systems. See, there's that support word again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it just blows my mind, and you're starting to piss me off like Jerry did. I can talk to you for days on end, and I will always learn something. And I'm like, there's got to be a point at my age, at my advanced age, that I've got to got kind of gotten there. But thank God that there's people that help us continue to grow. But yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about the trace elements, but I love tying it into this relationship with calcium. And I have talked a lot about calcium over the years, but probably never as detailed as we have done here. But understanding that, I love, and particularly, what you brought up about how the plant will just shoot out all these root exudates
Mhm.
to help it kind of work this calcium and bring it into the system, and those kind of things. There's a couple folks, if you and we were just about to talk on before we started. I see a couple things on LinkedIn on biologists and agronomists that post these very elaborate posts on how the structure is, and there's more and more and more of this kind of information and research, documented research going through the industry that's really kind of showing this, and it's fascinating to me. Which is why I wanted you to come here and talk about a single element. We haven't done that one before, have we? Really? Talk about
No,
this one. So if you read that book, will I get you back and we'll talk about strontium? I can't even say it. I didn't,
scandium.
Scandium, sorry. There's too many S's in that on that periodical chart. Uh, um, and you're actually excited about this book. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I've compiled the benefits of elements that aren't generally well known,
Yeah.
and this one has stood out because it's blank in my little database. So
So you haven't really studied this. So this is all new.
I don't know where
That's
it's going to
cool.
go. No,
Very cool. All right. Well, I'm going to have you back and talk about it at some point in time. But I am going to say thank you, and I appreciate it. I hope we didn't throw too much chemistry at everybody. But again, it is. I will say again, short of Calvantage, which I think is really just a you know a a liquid fertilizer, carbon-based material. I don't sell calcium, but I did start to ask you this, and before I do close off, can calcium, and talk about this, how does calcium move within the plant? Up, down, left, right? Can it get through a stoma? Can it be taken up as a foliar? How can a good a product like a Calvantage or a good liquid calcium product, will it be taken in foliarly, and what direction does it move within the plant?
I know calcium acetate can be taken in foliar. That's a carbon-based form of
And we're
calcium.
using calcium acetates.
Hey, there you go. I
But
didn't
it's
know
not,
if
I
I say
mean,
that or not.
I guess my point of the question is that not to debunk anybody saying this is foliar or not foliar, but most of the calcium is being taken in through the root system. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So
Yes.
even if you're spraying a good calcium product, couple gallons of water per thousand, it's going to go past the leaf. Most of it's going to go past the leaf. It's going to get down to that root, and it's going to start stimulating that plant to spit out these root exudates, and that calcium is going to start to really be available to the plant. Basic, is that fair?
Mhm.
All right, so I'm starting to review now. What I'm starting to do is try to get this crammed into my little pea brain and make
Okay.
sure I understand it. But yeah, there's a lot of, as you broached very eloquently, there is a lot of misunderstanding perhaps on the value of calcium. But I mean, is it fair to say that calcium is one of the most important elements in healthy plant material? I mean, in growing plants?
Probably the
Okay.
most
I was
important.
hoping you would say that actually, because I
Yeah.
think that's true.
If you look at natural soil solutions, in other words, they've never been fertilized, they're out in the woods, wherever, pull an undisturbed soil sample from anywhere in the world and extract, move the water solution out of it, analyze it, you're going to find on average about 1 millimolar of calcium in solution,
Wow.
and
That's
nothing else
impressive.
comes close to that.
Yeah.
Nothing.
And the best soils in the world are rich in carbon and rich in calcium.
Yes. Yeah.
So the
And
two
it's so
C.
impressive to see calcium as being in the highest concentration of any other element by far in these soil systems. So what we're doing is we're
Right.
mimicking that.
There you go. You're back to that natural mimic that you've been
I don't know
preaching.
how else to do it.
I don't know how else to do it either.
I mean, what are you going to do? Make up
I,
something?
that's what we're going to do. We're going to just sit there and yeah. But yeah, that's again, it's really hard not to. appreciate the value that calcium brings to the table. So, yes,
Exactly.
my friend, I do not sell calcium for a living, really, but I do love it as an element, and I love talking about it. And Lawrence, I can't thank you enough again and again and again, and we'll have you back as soon as you finish that book and
I
talk about
finished that book.
some of the other things
Okay.
we're talking about. Lawrence, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And if you haven't signed up for the EarthWorks podcast, we're going to tell you when Lawrence Mayhew comes back on the podcast. At least send you an email and let you know that he's out there. So please do, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much.